Hey friends, and welcome to our Bible study in the book of Genesis. In the last episode, we got to see Noah's faithfulness and righteousness. And in this episode, we're going to contrast that with Noah's sin when we look at Genesis chapter 9. But before we get there, if this is your first time here, I just want to personally welcome you to the HomeGrown Ministries YouTube channel. I'm DJ, and on this channel I strive to provide you with biblical wisdom and encouragement to strengthen your walk of faith. And I'm so glad you're here today. So let's examine Genesis chapter 9 together. The first thing we see happening in the chapter 9 of Genesis is God tells Noah and his family that going forward they are allowed to eat meat. And this is really interesting because what it shows is that eating meat was not something that was originally intended by God. Prior to the fall, in the Garden of Eden, man was meant to eat off of the plants alone. They weren't meant to kill animals and eat them. Now after the flood, for whatever reason, God tells Noah that he and his family are now allowed to eat meat. I don't know why. I'm not sure. There are people that will make claims as to why that is the case. I don't know enough about that, and I haven't researched enough about that. And all I can tell you is right now in the text doesn't say. So I'm not going to add to the Bible where it's not necessary to do so. But what we do see is that God puts caveats on this. And in this section of the Bible, in Genesis chapter 9, God's caveat is that we cannot eat meat that still has lifeblood in it. So to me, that tells me that they have to cook it. And that's so important because a lot of the Old Testament laws that seem weird and obscure to us really tend to be to the benefit of human health. We know that if you eat red meat that is undercooked, you could potentially get sick. And so God is establishing certain standards to make sure humans stay healthy. Now we see this further defined in the book of Leviticus chapter 11 when you see the definition of clean and unclean animals. So God is trying to keep humans safe, but still allowing them, at least in this section, to eat meat. The other thing we see here is that God is essentially saying that everything that lives and breathes has value, it has worth. And so every life will have an accounting for it, including human life. God says in verse 6 of chapter 9, "Whoever sheds human blood, by humans shall their blood be shedded. For in the image of God has God made mankind." So God here is establishing with Noah and his family the idea of capital punishment. Every life matters, and when a human takes another life, they must be punished via capital punishment. Now, there's a lot of flaws with capital punishment, especially when we as flawed humans make decisions on other flawed humans with flawed information. You could get it wrong, but if it's undeniable, if there's 100% true that one man killed another man, then here God is establishing the right to capital punishment. He's saying the accounting is that whoever sheds human blood, by humans shall their blood be shed. It's an important thing that we see here. Then in addition, God establishes a covenant with Noah and his family. And he says, never again will life be destroyed by a flood. He gives the sign of his covenant as a rainbow. So every time we see a rainbow as Christians, and the Israelites of the day, or Noah's descendants even, would see that rainbow and be reminded of the covenant. Now it's interesting how the Bible is written, because the Bible is always written from the perception of man. So it says that God will see the rainbow and be reminded to never destroy the earth with a flood. But God doesn't need to be reminded. So this is man's perception. Man sees the rainbow and remembers that God will be reminded not to destroy the earth. When in reality, all it is it's a example or a identifier, a symbol of the covenant with man to not destroy the earth. So I want to point that out, that God doesn't need to be reminded. He's not someone that's going to one day forget and be like, whoops, I'm going to flood the earth because I forgot. Oh, there's the rainbow. I'm not going to do that. Actually, I'm going to stop the rain. It's not how God works. And why it's written this way is because, again, it's man's perception of God. So sometimes you see things like that. Just like when we'll see later on in Genesis, what's going to look like Abraham argues with God and is able to change God's mind. That's not actually what's happening. What's happening is man's perception of God changing his mind, or man's perception of God being reminded to not flood the earth again. Now, here's the interesting contrast. After we get all that out, get away from all that stuff, we see Noah, a man of great faith, following God, listening to God, doing exactly what God says. Flood happens. Him and his family survive. He sees great things. He sees God's provision. And what's he do after all that occurs? He gets drunk. We are all broken. We are all fallen. The men of great faith throughout the Bible are all broken. And they all go back to their sinful ways. And it's a great hope to people like me, who I know I'm a sinner. I know I'm flawed. And if God could use other sinners, God can still use me too. And that's great. It's a great reminder that although you are flawed, you can still be useful for God. Because look at all the great things Noah did. I mean, he saved the human race essentially, but he's still a sinner. And at your points of greatest faithfulness is going to be at the point when you experience the most significant attack. Because Satan probably knows your weakness, and he's going to use it against you. And everyone has a different weakness, or a different thing that's going to make them sin. Noah might have been prone to strong drink. We don't know that. But you can see that he plants a vineyard, starts to drink wine, and he ends up getting drunk. And so after this moment of great faith, saving the human race, he falls to sin. And we see this, it's human nature. We see it time and time again throughout the whole Bible. We see, Moses, he goes up to Mount Sinai, gets the Ten Commandments, comes down, and what's he see? He sees the Israelites in sin. And it angers him so much that he breaks the Ten Commandments. The whole book of Judges is cyclical. You see moment of great faith with a judge. You see Israelites, believe in God, and then they fall away, and now they're at this point where they need saved again. A judge comes, they fall back in line with God, and then they fall away. It's cyclical. We see Peter, telling Jesus, I'll never deny you, even if it's up to the point of death, right? Great faith moment. And then what happens? Almost immediately after that, he denies Jesus 3 times. This is human nature. The good news is that should give you hope, because even with your brokenness, even with my brokenness, even with the brokenness of all the people that are accounted for in the Old Testament and the New Testament, God can still use us regardless of our sinful nature. But in addition, we should also identify what our weaknesses are so that we may be prepared for those attacks after our moments of great faithfulness. Now what happens is Noah gets drunk, and then his son Ham sees him naked. And it says that he tells his brothers. Now I'm assuming, based on how the exchange happens following, is that he's actually kind of telling them jokingly, like, can you believe what our dad's doing? He's lying naked out in the field, ha ha ha, right? Making fun of his dad, which is why he gets such a negative reaction. And that's why Shem and Japheth actually walk backwards, right? They're not looking at their father with a blanket, and they cover him up. They do the right thing, where Ham does the wrong thing, right? Ham is showing a sinful reaction, a reaction of, mockery. He's mocking his father's sin, where Shem and Japheth take the time to in humility, cover their father's nakedness. Now, what's weird here is that following that, Noah curses Canaan, which is Ham's descendant. And it's very interesting because why would Noah curse Ham's child as opposed to Ham himself? And I think it is more in line with the idea that Noah knew both individuals. Noah knew Ham and Noah knew Canaan. And Noah probably knew that Canaan took after his father and was probably even worse than his father was. So what he's really saying here is, although Ham is, a wretched man, Canaan is even more wretched, and because of his wretchedness, he's going to end up being slaves to his brothers. And here's the interesting thing here, guys. The takeaway that hits home for me is every parent has an impact on their children. And you have the ability to impact them in a positive way or a negative way. And my sins, my sinful nature, is still going to impact them, whether through genetics or through how I actually nurture them, right? There's the nature versus nurture. They get some of my sinful nature just through my genetics. But they also are going to be watching me at all times and see how I respond to things. And so if I'm prone to anger, my children are probably going to be prone to anger because that's the nurture. That's what they're grown up in. That's what they experience day in, day out. So we have to, as parents, be on our guard because if nothing else, our children are always watching us. And our actions have a direct impact on how they end up living their lives. So I ask you today, the most important question of this Bible study is what impact do you have on your kids? And if you don't have kids, what impact are you having on the people around you? Because if you claim to be a Christian, people are watching your behavior. So make sure your behavior is in line with that of what Christ is calling you to do. Guys, that concludes the Bible study on Genesis chapter 9. I hope you found value in it. Let me know if there's something that I said that really stuck out to you, or if there's something I said that you disagree on. Please let me know in the comments below. I'd love to hear from you. And Christian friends, please continue to be the salt to the earth, be the light to the world. Go encourage somebody else today because the world desperately, desperately needs it. And I'll see you in the next video. Bye.